From Minneapolis, Minnesota, welcome to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.
Today, theater begins with comic books, but first, a membership highlight. This season, we will be offering writing workshops for playwrights to meet weekly, in person or virtually via Zoom. These workshops are goal-oriented writing accountability groups focused on revising or generating new drafts of plays with extensive opportunities for writing, sharing, and discussing work with the instructor and peers. Upcoming workshops will be posted on our classes page, pwcenter.org/classes. And now, on to the show. Crystal Skillman is an internationally award-winning playwright, fictional podcast writer, and comic book author. She has written for Stories Podcast, Wondery Kids, Girl Tales, Adventure Time Comics, and Marvel Comics. Upcoming theater credits include The Rocket Men, which was nominated for this year's NNPN Showcase and will kick off its first production at the Phoenix Theater in fall 2025, and Rain and Zoe Save the World, which premiered in the UK in 2022, whose American premiere will be announced later this year. She is also the playwright of Open, a New York Times Critics' Pick play published by Dramatist Play Service. Crystal is the book writer of Mary and Max the Musical. Composer-lyricist is Bobby Cronin, which is currently in the pipeline for Broadway with Drew and Dane Productions. She was just named a finalist for the Music Theater Conference at the O'Neill. She is the author of the New York Times Critics' Pick plays Geek, produced by Qui Gwyn's theater company, and Cut, which first put her on the map in the theater scene. She is co-author of King Kirby with Fred Van Lente, which you can listen to on the Broadway Podcast Network. The graphic novel of their webtoon Eat Fighter, which has had over 1 million views, will be coming out from Rocket Ship Comics this fall. Welcome, Crystal.
Hi. So great to be here.
It's so good to have you. Well, we like to start this podcast by asking the same question, which is, how did you get into theater?
Yes, I was actually, and it's funny because I teach for the new school now, but I was studying visual art and photography at Parsons School of Design. And I was minoring in theater. So I had an internship at Circle Repertory Theater, Lamford Wilson's theater at the time, and Ensemble Studio Theater. And so as I was creating this visual work, I was actually universe building. So I was making these kind of installation pieces that had narratives and had dialogue and had dramatic action. And so I performed one of them called Carpe Diem is Not a Japanese Fish downtown. And through the theater and kind of vibe of the scene, it turns out there were a lot of critics there that night, even though it was quite a fringy kind of performance. The performance was that I was dressed. I didn't know any actors at the time massively. I was dressed in a bathrobe and I clearly just had a breakdown and I was eating cookies and drinking milk obsessively. And it was kind of like a podcast because you could hear what was going on in my head, which was that the man and woman operating my brain were having an argument. And through the argument of how to solve my crisis of my breakdown, they fell in love and fell out of love within 10 minutes. And so it was a pretty fun piece. It was originally recorded, I think, on a tape, which is how I kind of started actually, or using actually cassettes. And Mimi Kramer, who wrote for the New Yorker at the time, grabbed me and said, "Hey, this is amazing. I think you're actually a playwright." And I said, "That's so awesome. What's that?" You know, I hadn't met a living playwright. I had worked in theater, but I didn't know that people that were living could be playwrights. It just wasn't. And at the time, this was the 90s and the 80s, we still had a lot of, revivals and kind of older stuff going on, even beyond high school. So through those accolades, which was kind of got me going, I started writing short plays, and the artistic director of Ensemble Studio Theater at the time put me in a group called Youngblood. And once I was in that group, I was suddenly surrounded with those that became my colleagues in my community: Francine Volpe, Daniel Talbot, Lucy Thurber, John Beluso is no longer with us, but I really became a very close friend and my mentor, Christopher Shin, and many other Jay Holtham, and many other wonderful playwrights. And so through that community, I just kept writing plays, and I began to kind of really analyze this art form and medium, going backwards and forwards, because I would end up going back to visual art and in storytelling with comics, which I know we'll get into. That happened because my best friend and badass skateboarder, Gretchen Van Lente at Parsons School of Design, who was studying illustration, went into puppetry, which I know those listening in Minneapolis will love because you have such a great, vibrant puppet scene there. Her company's called Drama Works. She kept saying, you should meet my brother. You should really meet my brother. You guys both like writing and you like They Might Be Giants and weird stuff. And I did. And we ended up dating and moving in together the year I graduated and getting married. I've been married now for 20 plus years. And he was a comic book creator and is a comic book creator and novelist. So as we began to live together, work together, he and I like to say monkey see, monkey do. And so he ended up writing a play about a comic book artist, Jack Kirby, who co-created the Marvel Universe along with Stan Lee. Ask why you know Stan's name, but not Jack's as much, but you're wearing his artwork on your t-shirts. And then vice versa, we began to collaborate on comics like the Adventure Time comics and Eat Fighter. So that's kind of what thrust me into both worlds. And so I've been kind of going back and forth for a long time now.
That's so incredible. It's kind of a Joni Mitchell story. It feels like.
I see clouds from both sides now.
So when did you know that this was like your career? Whether you want to talk about career in comic books or career in theater and the combination of it, when were you like, yeah, I'm doubling down. This is where I want to be. This is what I should be doing.
It's if you really track my career, you can see me learning in front of people, learning out loud, because I didn't go to an MFA playwriting program. And now I teach MFA playwriting at the New School. So it came full circle, but I had to consistently analyze what worked in each form and what didn't between workshops, between grabbing my friends and saying, David Zelnick, how are you doing this? Christopher Shin, how are you doing this? Like Francine Volpe, what's going on here? Jay Holtham. And I was lucky to have that community and be coming up with them. And I had to fail a bit out loud. I had to also succeed out loud. But because of Youngblood, and I happened to be in it at a formative time, now Youngblood often is the main shows that you go see along with the Sloan Foundation, what they do at Ensemble Studio Theater. And Rob Askins, Hand to God came out of Youngblood as well. But before Rob Askins' time, I was a part of that formative group that actually, it was just play readings. So we were part of starting to produce our own work. So being there at that point, I think, to answer your question, I think I always felt like this was a career and I was a professional because I wasn't always waiting for someone else to produce my work. I was often in conversation, had relationships with people, but I didn't see it as that I had to stop and wait for someone to put a stamp of approval on me. Then something kind of interesting happened, which does not happen to everyone, which was because of Youngblood, because there was kind of some heat from this new group starting to produce, kind of like 13P also had that heat when it was formed. For those that remember, so I was reviewed by the Times, but I'd only been writing plays for 2 years. And so once that had happened and I went through that good and bad crisis and crossed that threshold, I think I was in print. I had reviews of my work. I had a community. I saw how plays and community could change the world. I also saw how this medium is dramatic writing and can be used in several ways. And so I really just considered myself a professional from the very beginning. I also always have a deadline. I always think of it as work. I've never thought of it as magic, even though I write a lot about magic. I've understood that you have to force yourself to write, and you are in conversation with yourself in order to achieve the things you need to achieve.
This is a little bit off topic, but something you just said about you weren't always waiting for somebody to produce your work. This is a theme I think that comes up a lot in conversations for us and with other playwrights. And it often feels to me in those conversations like people feel stymied by that, or or they feel like they're being sort of pigeonholed in a way. And I wonder if there was any kind of discovery of a greater creative or more boundless kind of creative imagining or writing, or how did that positively impact your work and your curiosity and your play within it?
It was nothing but empowering. I think early on, and this was generational with I think those that were coming from the 90s to the aughts, because really the New York Times review starts, World for Me begins or being in the critical eye. Starts in the early aughts. There was a perception back in the day that like a place like Playwrights Horizons or, on the nonprofit off-Broadway scene, that would be seen as a negative if you produced your own work. What we didn't understand at the time, because we didn't have as much information as we have now, we didn't talk as point blankly as we do now. So it's pretty clear that like if you have something that someone can see, like if Playwrights Horizons can come see it, that's what's most important. It really doesn't matter who produced it. I will say that depending on your goals, you may want a creative producer, you may want co-producers, but that's much more about creating the art and stepping outside yourself as much as you need to. I never actually directly produced my own work, but what happened was because they were a lot of independent productions and I had to say, All for One, you love open, Tank, you love open, let's talk, and let's, so I was very proactive in being producerial in a way and making connections with people that they could work together. But I always worked either with a line producer or a creative producer or someone who would guide or give me advice. There was one experience in which the producer went dark, but it's kind of like course and nothing for me. I appreciate that the person was there, but I did not have the positive experience in, don't go dark on people, just send an email. So I was terrified, and it was a small little downtown production, but it was also an adaptation of my husband's work. So called Action Philosophers, which was on stage. I really love that show. And I called up a friend and I said, I'm scared. I'm in this position and I'm worried. And he goes, listen, you can do this. And he gave me a whole list. And that was the first time I directly produced. And it was actually really helpful to do so. Very scary. Gave me this list and I was like, okay, I can do that. I can do that. Because I realized how much of it was checklisty. And I was like, I'm not a type A personality, but I can pretend to be someone with a type A personality. I was like, I knew I could try. And then at the very end, this is my friend David Jackson. He said, okay, and this is the most important thing. And I said, oh my God, what is it? And I was like, why is it where the magic bag of gold is? I was like crying, And he was like, no one will ever thank you. No one will appreciate your work as a producer. Nobody will care. People will only come to you with problems. People will never be happy. People will never be satisfied. And you have to understand it is not you. And you have to understand, be prepared. And so I was psychologically, because I had this speech, and he was absolutely correct. I was never treated, quite honestly, as poorly, even though some of these folks I was working with are my friends. And because this was a special circumstance, I didn't hold anything against anyone. They were as good as they could be in the circumstance. But, I would literally pat myself on the back and I would say, I think you did great. And I just would be in communication with myself. How that helped me in terms of when I collaborate or work on a team is that I always thank people, and I absolutely thank the producers, and I absolutely am aware that it may not be all the perfect little thing that we thought it would be. That doesn't mean you withhold your thanks. That doesn't mean you withhold your gratitude. Labor is labor. And if you don't appreciate that and you don't demonstrate that with other people, they just, they're not going to want to work with you again, because there is not enough money in this industry at all to make anyone feel really great. So you have to make other people feel great and make them feel that they were a part of something special. And so I really take that to heart, and I hope I demonstrate that with anyone I work with.
Such good wisdom right there.
And it's hard sometimes for a writer because we get very specific about what we want, and we think, oh, but this wasn't exactly what I want. I don't know if they deserve the praise. I don't know, but it's always going to be 90%. Like if you're lucky, it's 100. If it's amazing, it's 120%, right? But it's, you're never going to get everything you want. There's a list of previews before you go up on Broadway. You never get through the full list. It's impossible. So you have to pick the top 3 and just do your best. And if you get past the 3, cool, then shove in 2 other things onto your list. But you're never going to get all 10 that you want. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
No, that's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And it also helps you as a writer really fixate on, what does my audience need to walk away with?
Yes.
What is the experience? What was the most important part of the experience that I need you to walk away with?
Yes. You're servicing the story.
Everything else kind of just fills into place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's the biggest thing that's clicked for me in the past, especially in the past 5 years, is it's beyond you. It is your play, but it is not your play. It is, we all have to serve the story. And wherever you work in television or comics, that is, the only time it gets scary is when you realize maybe someone on the team doesn't really understand the story, or, and this is an easier circumstance, you need to be clear with what the story is. But if we all serve the story, we all succeed.
As we're bringing in comics, the root of our conversation, why do you love comics? Why is this a really great vehicle to tell stories? Why should we all be geeked about comics?
Well, it's an art form that just puts it all together and also gets you that wonderful feeling in your heart when you do that page flip, right? Like, and it's really told correctly and excitingly. You're arrested by the visuals. Your curiosity is piqued. You're emotionally following your characters. I love novels. I would say they're extremely difficult. I will be tackling that a little bit with a new series I'm working on, but word by word, line by line, you're trying to capture that reader, right? And the balance in telling a story through words and pictures is just so exciting because you get to control the pace. The authors control the pace on the page, but then the reader has another special relationship to that. They may even want to stay in a certain panel for a little bit longer and really investigate what's in the background, what's going on. They may want to flip. They may want to do that on a second viewing. So there's a very beautiful, almost like, and I was saying this on a podcast the other day, a book that really inspired me was a book called The Never-Ending Story, which in itself was an amazing story, but also the film of it became a classic. And right, we're all thinking of The Swamps of Sadness and Atreyu. And yes, yeah, I love it that there's such a reaction. Do you guys know that? You guys know that story?
Oh my gosh! If you could see our faces, yeah, we're all thinking about this poor horse.
But what's hard is that I watched The Never-Ending Story and The Dark Crystal roughly around the same time. So I still mix both of them up a lot of the time. So it's just one large story for me.
Understood. And Last Unicorn. We could put The Last Unicorn in there too. Those three, it's like a triad. Maybe Secret of Nim as well. But yeah, totally. Well, I think what specifically The Never-Ending Story that I saw at a younger age that I really related to, and also I can relate that to a play, which is called Breaking the Code by Hugh Whitmore, a British playwright. It was about the life of Alan Turing that was told out of sequence. And it was really genius. But I realized, because I saw Breaking the Code when I was 10, and I was around 10, reading The Never-Ending Story and then seeing the film. And stories within stories, like I realized very quickly that was the thing that I was interested in, and these layers and how you can pierce through either to your listener listening, or if they're reading a book or flipping the page or in a play. So I was always interested in who the listener is, who the audience is, or who the reader is. And so when I write, I am definitely taken over by the story, making choices and things like that, and then shaping and molding. But at the same time, I am looking for that secret sauce that by the end of it, or a certain point in the climactic sequence of the storytelling, you understand your relationship to the material has changed. And in the story, The Never-Ending Story, a boy is reading a book, but throughout reading the book, he feels a little bit safe, but he has his own issue. He's lost his mother recently. And it isn't until the climax of the book that he realizes that his decisions impact the main character. And in fact, he himself is the main character. And I just, it was an earlier fantastical way of talking about narratives and what narratives we tell and what affect us. And that's really something that's hit the zeitgeist recently, especially as we're making way for new voices and giving agency to all sorts of creators. So it's something that's always stuck with me. And I think there's something about that that's timeless, which is why my work is kind of very timely, but timeless. It hits what we're talking about now, but it's, you could produce it still or read it years from now. So that's the thing that I think comics provides, is that balance between reality and fantasy, and the things that you, and I'm using quotes here in case people can see air quotes, can't accomplish on stage. Now, this is a lot of BS, and I write theatrical work. I will say it is extremely difficult and a big Sisyphus rock I got to push up the hill to explain to most people who work in theater just how theatrical work works. And, for some reason they get it or admire it with Sarah Kane writing "A sunflower grows out of the ground." But when you're a living playwright, I've had artistic directors say that can't happen on stage, and that's very limiting and makes no sense. I will say over my time working in the theater, what I've learned is show how you're going to do it. And that lays in the hands, if you're not directing it yourself, that lays in the hands of really talented directors. So recently I've begun to work with directors Jared Mazzacci and Christopher Gattelli, and that has been really awesome. And Jesse Hill, who I've worked with for a long time, has always had this capacity. So I kind of have understood if I'm writing something quite challenging or theatrical on stage, or quote unquote seems like a screenplay, which simply just means it's not a one person scene. It's not two people in a basement talking. That I understand, okay, I'm going to have to demonstrate what my vision is for it on stage, just to make sure that people don't panic.
I love that.
Yeah, that's been like a big thing is as the playwright, you have to come up with a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And it like that just feels so much pressure, because I'm like, oh, well, I would love other ideas. I would love like this vision to be on there, but I'm really writing this experience. And there's so many different ways that you can show a person floating out in space. What does that look like? If you have a performer that's a dancer, it can be more implied by their movement versus, no, I'm going to actually put this person on a harness and have them like moonwalk and jump. I'm just like, the point of theater is that it gets remounted. Different casts come in, a different art director comes in.
And collaborative.
It should be malleable.
Right.
It should be, and it should feel like a different production each time someone does it. So I kind of hate that it is put on playwrights to come up with the solution to something that's difficult. I'm a little bit like, you're in theater, be creative.
I feel the same way. And I think
like there's always a creative solution.
There's always a creative solution. And I do think we still have, people in all offices that get excited by this and get excited to be a part, because true creative producing is being a part of, this happened to me with Drew and Dane Productions. They introduced me to Jared and Jared's work. And it was a natural fit and excitement all over the place. But I had that extra help and those extra sets of eyes helping me solve that issue. This was specifically with a play called Brandon and Zoe Save the World. So, when it's just you, I think that's why the relationships are so important between talking to a playwright and going to see directors' work and analyzing it between the playwriting and direction. All of this is a part of that, but I do think that literary teams can see and get excited about these sorts of things. It's just that you do want to guide a little bit with how you see it with budget in the world, but it's producerial too, because you may be shortcutting yourself. You may think it's a little more fringy than it is. Rain and Zoe was so imaginative. I saw it in a larger way, but I didn't realize I was still using fringe or downtown terms. Not that I can't, because that's part of the magic. The truth is, a lot of Quick Win stuff does this. You're seeing it with this larger budget in this wonderful way at MTC, but those are a lot of things that he pioneered downtown. So I have a lot of that as well in my work, and what I've learned is just how to talk about it. It's really hard in the moment when things are challenging, but it's also kind of the most amazing stories later. There was a co-producer in London working on that version, and I think he really saw the original version kind of, it was at German Street, really saw it when he read the script, because I said it's a play of the imagination, which is something I like to do and say. I really try to put the reader in a mindset that they're imagining if a bike broke apart and people were suspended in air, what would that look like, And I think at some point he was so tired and trying to problem solve. And he was like, you said it was a play of the imagination. And he's like, this is a big budget show. I kind of realized, well, that's fair. I mean, you kind of made a lot of assumptions without me being there. But also, like, I get it. Like, I understood. So, it's all learning. I mean, it's all goes into the next show. And I really do believe that, at least from my work, which is something I could not predict. 15 years ago, I would think you do the show in New York, you put it up, you publish it, other people do it. I think I have learned that for the kind of work I want to do and the kind of challenging work that I'm talking about, not challenging to understand, challenging to make sure it's right so the audience isn't distanced, and that if you are writing strong visuals that are part of the storytelling in live storytelling, that it's not coming at you. It's not being didactic. It's not, there's an experiential event way of doing this, and each solution for each play is different. So to do that, you need to see the production with that team 2 to 3 times. We call this out-of-town tryouts in musicals, which is, so because I worked in musicals, I kind of started to see this in the plays. And I was like, okay, that's what I need to do. And Open, that happened out of love because Susan Burnfield loved the show. So like, hey, have some space at New George's. Like, this wonderful lighting designer loves the show. Great, let's like play around, right? So that was kind of happening organically with a much smaller show, but I didn't understand that's what was happening until the past couple of years when I was like, okay, what really works? Why do I need a design lab? And how can I make sure that that design lab actually informs the production? How did these 2 other productions inform this production? And that's one of the things that's so cool about theater is it's very sketchy in that way. And I love that. Comics obviously have sketches because you need drawing and you're going to chime in, as the process goes along. But the truth is your script really needs to be clear and drive us in the right way, because in theater, the way we're paid, but of course it's all, we're like, we need more money. But we understand when we take a job, hey, I may say this line like this today, I might get direction, I might change. Now, when you're working with a visual artist, they're not going to want to redraw that page 500 times. They're going to really want that story to be clear. They're going to want to bring themselves to it and be in conversation with you. But they're not, if they give you back a fully penciled page, they are not going to be happy if you say, oh, well, actually, I don't think we need these 2 panels. And like, I actually want to change this visual to the extent that you now will do another, 72 hours for free. That's just, if you're working with a really great visual artist, that's not going to happen. So yeah, musicals are a little like that too, in a different way.
Can you talk about how comics and plays intersect for you in your work?
Yeah, I think all art forms are really hard. And I'm starting to think every time I spend more time in another one, I'm like, ooh, this is the really hard one. But I will say that I think my assessment is correct that theater is the most difficult, because you're trying to get people not to walk out or fall asleep to the best of your ability with the sleeping giant, as I like to call the audience, in real time. That's hard. I mean, that's like the hardest thing that one can do. I mean, if you love, I love Watchmen, right? I might go through a couple of chapters and be like, you know what? I need to take a bath and I need to think about this. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I need to like eat dinner. I could put it down. I could come back and I could still be a great reader. Same thing with a podcast, right? It's like, one of my favorite things with theater people is they don't really understand that you're supposed to, as you listen to this podcast, I hope you are doing the dishes. You shouldn't be sitting and watching your iPhone. Hopefully you're doing other things. Most podcast lovers do that. It was kind of hilarious. I mean, the pandemic was not a hilarious thing, but this was hilarious that many people would say, Crystal, I don't have 3 hours to sit right now. And I was like, oh my gosh, the whole point of this meeting, but they're theater people, so they don't understand. They think, I'm going to be disrespectful. I'm like, we're not being disrespectful. Your iPhone's not going to say, whoa, I know that you're doing the dishes while you're listening to, Night Vale, So,
rude.
Rude. But in terms of even though theater, when it's in performance, is one of the most challenging, I would say that it is a little bit of a shaggy dog. Like it's like you can be shaggy, like we still love to talk about the well-made play, but now more than ever, we've seen success with plays that, quote, air quotes, were not well made, or use that technique and then expose something different, like Fairview, which is a very well made play, but tricks you in many wonderful ways that forces you to really encounter what the play is about, or appropriate, or all these really great. Malima's Tale also did this. Lenadage's play. It's all over the place, indecent, and I hope that that's something I'm doing too. With these reveals. So it is the most challenging, but you can have work that is so captivating and so draws you in. It doesn't have to be perfect. And it's really hard. It can't be perfect, but like at the same point, the audience, if they're following a character and they're following a story they really, really love, let's say that monologue's a little too long, another air quotes, or this scene is a little draggy, I love Angels in America. I don't know if I love every single moment of Angels in America, but I'm with it, right? So like there's just a different relationship to this art form. It's also a little bit more immediate, like a Polaroid, especially if you're willing to do something innovative that is bare bones in some kind of a way. I always say I'm being bare bones, but unfortunately I put in too many props. But like to keep it essence. So you could see the sketch of something, you could see what something's like, you can get to know characters, you can start to build a world without, paying a lot of other people or having to work with an artist and some of the things I'm talking about, because it's language based. So I can say, it's also symbolic. So, I like to say to my students, and it's such a silly example, but if I pick up a banana and I put it to my ear and I say, hello, we know that banana is a phone, that's a really shitty film. That would be a pretty shitty comic. and then podcasting, which is the closest we could kind of get away with it. Right. But the challenge of great podcast writing is, or fictional podcasting or audio, is like, how do you know everything you're seeing without telling people that's what they're seeing, and that's a art form unto itself. So it's fun to see how the storytelling lasts for people in different ways. To come back to what theater offers that the podcasting doesn't, because you should be doing your dishes. I encourage you to, or walk your dog or whatever's happening. Theater is the only art form other than like sit-ins or a happening or something a little special with another art form that says we are in this together. This is a contract between at that point, I'm out of the game. Let's say I can't do changes anymore. This is a contract between the performers. And I love the designers. I love everybody. But the truth is, if the lights go out, there's still a play, right? If the lights go out, there's still words. There are still people saying those words, or robots, or whatever's happening. So, or holograms. And so, it's between the performers, however we define that, and the audience, there's a contract. And you can see the other audience members, and you could feel the other audience members, and they are just as a part of it. One of my stories that I just totally jazzed me recently was Enemy of the State, and Michael Imperioli's fantastic response, which only helps the climate crisis point. For those listening that weren't aware, in the middle of the Broadway performance, there's a moment where the doctor is being accused of being an enemy of the people because he's found poisoned. It's Ibsen play. adapted by Amy Herzog, and has found that there's poison in the water. And so at some point, it's almost like a town hall sequence staged on Broadway. And a climate crisis activist with a really cool group got up and said, I have something to say. And, theater doesn't exist on a dead planet, and make some terrific points. Michael Imperioli is playing the mayor of the town, not a nice person, even though he himself is an incredibly active protester. He's a wonderful human in addition to a wonderful actor. He is the mayor, and he does not break character. And he got up and he started to push that protester out and say, out of here as the mayor. I don't want anyone to hear this. And it was electric. Adam Feldman was there from Time Out New York, wrote a great piece about it. And so it helped amplify just the act of staying in character. And this initiative only helped bring the act of theater and climate crisis together in a riveting conversation, which absolutely hits the zeitgeist. And that's why they chose to produce this play right now in the first place, because it talks about these issues. So that was a very exciting thing that quite organically happened in theater.
Yeah, you've kind of bled into some of the other questions that we've had of looking at the differences between theater, comic books, and also audio plays as well. Can you talk about how you use all of these elements in your work, whether it's how can I add some theatricality to this comic book, or how can I add these visuals? Because when it comes to a comic book, like I love Sandman.
Oh yeah.
I love Sandman. I love the eerie and the creepy comic book series as well. So I really dig those graphic novels. And Neil Gaiman found a way to like force you to turn the book because they're in the portal, and then you have to read the book like a hamburger versus a hot dog. And then you're just like following the comic book that way. And then they go back through the portal and you have to turn the book again. And I just think about like, that's the author got you to physically do something. The author needed you as an audience member. There's this exchange of energies that's happening. That feels like it only happened in theater, but I think that there are ways to also include that in comic books. So just wondering how you kind of bleed those into each other, use different elements that people say you can't use with those.
Yeah, comics, like you just said, whether it be a 2-page spread or a splash page, or, I also find that musical storytelling works incredibly well in comics. You could see the lyrics, you can have a different feeling and relationship to a sequence as someone's playing a song. There's some great comics with, rock star leads and things like that. Scott Pilgrim played with this a lot with the band. So you can break through the page to the reader in a way. I would say that this technique is not unsimilar to audio in the sense of, there's an old ride called for Muppets 3D. And I think it still may exist at I think it's like a Disney or something at the Hollywood studio. But you're going through this, you're just kind of watching it, and this little creature who's like a little bee has come out of the screen, and it's in 3D, and all the Muppets are having a lot of shenanigans on this tour, which is really a 3D movie. But the little bee I think its name is Wally B or something. He comes and he's like right in front of your nose, and you could see that everyone else with their 3D glasses has a little creature in front of them, and he goes, everyone thinks I'm really talking to them, but I'm really talking to you. And I just think that there's something about it's almost the never ending story thing where you're like, I'm doing this thing in relationship to it, but you're also thinking what did the other people do? And I'm a part of a secret club, and what's happening right now? Chris Ware, who's a comic book artist I also really loved, as Jimmy Corrigan and Quimby Mouse. Also, he would do all these little mazes and little intricate side stories within a story. And, you can get internal in a way with comic book. You can get into someone's head, you could, just draw the cross section of what is going on in my head or body and show, as much as tell. So they're always looking for that balance in, I think, great dramatic writing. And that's why comics has that relationship, which is so cool. I would say for me, in terms of stage work, I am looking for that dynamic kind of animation, if that makes sense, that is not animation, but is not naturalistic. And I would say that for most playwrights, and most playwrights these days do not, well, first of all, it's absurd that we even, naturalism was originally, the way we talk about it, was originally in Chekhov's time, and it was a response to spectacle. So all they were saying was like, crazy shit might happen, but it's not like, Deus Ex Machina, or it's not, like an angel's coming from the ceiling, right? Like, it's like I'm making a pot of oysters, and that's a part of the scene, and we might eat these oysters while we talk. Like, to me, that's really what, but it's all given circumstance, and it's all storytelling. And I think the American theater, because it's a younger theater, because it's also because art in this country is younger, and we don't have, to be quite honest, a great relationship with it. That's why we have the money troubles we do, because the government on a natural basis doesn't support the arts and doesn't support theater to the extent if your work is done in Europe or anywhere else in the world. There's just a different relationship to the necessities of art in the culture and how long it's been there. So to come back to what I mean by naturalism is that we just really grabbed onto that, I think, and it's so funny because Death of a Salesman is the most non-naturalistic play I think that's ever been written. Like, this guy's having a breakdown. We go into his flashbacks. His like uncle appears with like magic talk of this like diamond mine. Like, this is not naturalism, right? Like, but most people speak about anything with the working class or man like that way. And so American theater really kind of held on to that. So when we're talking about animation or not non-naturalistic work on stage, what I'm talking about is a kind of heightenedness where it's clear this is a play, but we also understand when it's not a play, and that the devices that we're using to see and experience the play that remain emotional, they don't come at you, but they lead you through the story in a unique way. So you're just as interested in the story itself by how it's being told. And over time, I found that a couple of key things to make that work. One is on stage. One is keep the story simple. Let the storytelling be hard. And that way I can go into a multitude of complexities. But I learned, okay, this is basically the log line of what the piece is, even though a million things happen. So I got a better mastery of that in my work and in my craft. I also understood in this that in naturalistic work, like Long Day's Journey or something like that, or I'm trying to think of something recent that is, I would say Mary Jane is very naturalistic. Amy Herzog's other play running on Broadway, which really moment to moment, you're with the characters in those moments that following Mary Jane. And her struggle to save her sick child. If you are doing the kind of techniques I'm saying, Mary Jane is wonderfully concise, and that play is absolutely fantastic, but probably even has a little bit more room. I would say because when you are doing something a little bit more animated or heightened, Indecent also has this quality as well. And some of the other plays I mentioned, Malima's Tale is a masterpiece of it. Space and time works a little differently. So if you have too many beats, because a beat can be so full. So if you're giving someone like a rich chocolate cake, right? This bike of Rain and Zoe that they have stolen to shut down a pipeline has been smashed apart, and these two teenage characters are hung in the air. That's a big chocolate cake. And I may have to like let go some of the other beats of storytelling to build up to that, to come out of that, and that. So I think what I kind of got sometimes in like 10 years ago, my work is people say, I love your work. It's so dense. And that's actually what they meant. They didn't mean that the beats were difficult or they couldn't understand them. There was just a lot of chocolate cakes, So like I kind of understood, okay, well, how do we have quieter moments? What is the ride here? And for each play, it's kind of different. And I'm aware that even though I may enjoy some extra beats or too many notes, as they say in Amadeus, I'm aware of the audience's fatigue. And it's a good thing. It's physical because they're reacting, they're laughing, they're having emotions, they're going here, they're going there. So if, you can have a riveting 5 hours and that's great. But if you are also want them to really just be broken or wherever or come out with excitement at the end of your play, you have to ask yourself, how are the beats from the ride? What is that emotional and physical experience for the audience? And that's why I think I need to see so many productions of it because I need to feel that ride. I need to talk to the audience. I just need to kind of sense it. Yeah. So I would say there's that. And then the other thing I learned was working with directors that are collaborative, that are here to serve the story, that have a strong visual point of view, but are not interested in rolling over me with a steamroller, because, and I won't name names, but some of those people did that. And I didn't realize that they were more interested in a showcase for their work than my story, which sometimes can be challenging to know. So now that I understand that, I'm working with such great people and they bring these solutions. Specifically with Rain and Zoe, what was missing is that I had these, in the text work, I had these two characters that did all the other roles in the play. And it's very beautiful and emotional and great, but it didn't capture some of the animated stuff I was looking for on this journey, or the clarity of how playful it was, but an artful kind of playful. It can be done in a fringe way, but it needs thought and tone. And what Jared Mazzacci came up with, which we really love, is that these two players also run back to these almost like overhead projectors where they draw really quick and they like run little things through the background. So if Rain and Zoe in their foreground on a bike, behind them they're dragging an animated sequence, but it isn't projected. They've made it in real time. So when something is made in real time with the audience, they connect to it. When something is projection heavy, just being projected, but it isn't coming from the actor or dramaturgy, what can happen, and Jared Mazzacci has been wonderful at articulating this, but I could also sense it from his work. What can happen if you do that kind of work is that it comes at the audience, and the audience gets complacent because it's very easy to distinguish the difference between live action and then the projection. The more, connected it is, the more it feels more, like I said, like animation, because it feels like people and characters you care, or settings, or, a visual feeling that you care about because you feel like you're in it.
Mm-hmm. I love that distinction. And one could imagine that you would be looking at these stories more from that visual point of view, but I love how you're talking about it really as the emotional and physical experience for the audience, and how that animates the characters and all that stuff. It's cool.
And I think that's the kind of collaborators I'm working with too. Those directors are just as interested in an audience's experience. It's less about being liked or not liked, or, people can not like a story of mine. That's great. I just want to kind of understand like where they're coming from, or why, as I continue to perfect it. And they care about number one, they care about the audience. I would also say I like working with collaborators that like their work being part of a popular art form. Comics is a popular art form, and it was really poo-pooed upon. Even at the birth of comics, it was seen almost like a sleazy art form in some ways. So we talk about Jack Kirby, who kind of really was there in the 30s, really, and late 20s to 30s, really pioneering comics. But comics was not a thing until it was a thing, kind of like musical theater, to be quite honest. And so one of the reasons why I think I understood the value of comics before I met Fred was that when I was like a teenager, I went to see Art Spiegelman's Mouse, the original artwork at MoMA. And so I felt like I never had I never poo-pooed comics and thought, oh, that's trashy. All I know is it was presented to me as art and a story that has value in the culture. And so I knew that. I knew that it was beautiful art, but it was also had to function as a book. And so I often think about something's one thing, but can also be another thing. So that I think the collaborative teams I like working with are all in it to solve it together. I've been dismayed, and it's only happened once or twice, but I just know to look out for it when a director is looking entirely on their design team to solve everything, but it's not coming from their vision, which happens more often than you think. It's got to be a flow. It's got to be coming from really being able to break down what the story's about, what's your approach to it, and then how did the designers work with that, and then it becomes all of that collaboration is able to be in harmony with each other.
Right. Well, you've named some names as we've gone along, but Do you have any art crushes that you would like to shout out so that people can check them out, see their work, read their work, however these artists do their work?
Yeah. Some you already know that I've mentioned, like Paul Vogel, Dominique Moroso. Also, I don't think I mentioned yet, are Lauren Gee, but also are artists that I think are important to watch and read and understand, because they're just life changing. I also really let's see, I'm not sure how to say his name, but I really got into I Want to Fuck Like Romeo and Juliet by Andrew Racon. It has a little accent, so Andrew, I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. Susan Soon He Stanton. Everyone here may know, but may know more from their work on Succession. But today's my birthday, and several of their plays are just absolutely magnificent. Matthew Paul Almos is having a wonderful Matthew. We haven't seen each other physically in a long time, but I've been so excited that their work pioneered Steppenwolf recently, and has been for a long time pioneering strong, important work. Adam Simkowitz continues to push boundaries with the Tale of Marion, which is kind of a lesbian angle on the Robin Hood story, and high schools all over the country, fight to do it and fight their school boards if they have to do it. So kudos to all of that. I'm co-teaching with Gina Femia right now, who I know y'all know really well as well. Wonderful artist, has some new work coming out this year, which is exciting. And I would say my biggest crush that I don't we've maybe chatted, maybe I've shook her hand, but is Paula Vogel. I think there was a deep desire to study with her, and because but I didn't really have that opportunity. So Paula, you've probably seen me around you at parties, and I am art crushing on you because you're the greatest. And obviously Paula has a new show on Broadway, Others, so you should go see it. It's a really great, and Amy Herzog as well it's nice to see Amy's work being represented by 2 plays currently. Carson Kreitzer also have to shout out with Lampika. If you haven't watched Carson and Rachel and Matt's closing speech, which you can find on YouTube from Lampika, it's 19 minutes long. Greg Noble, I think, is also on that chatting. It is awesome. It will inspire you. I mean, it's difficult that it closed early, but they really have made this a moment to speak about female forward stories and why we might react to them the way we do, and how we have to keep challenging that, especially with queer narratives.
Yeah.
So all of that I found just very powerful and exciting. Sorry, a little bit more. Chris Diaz has been rocking the world with Hell's Kitchen, and all that success is so well earned. Chris is also a really respected dramatic arts teacher, and as many of the students and young playwrights I see that are exciting come out of Chris's class. And I also want to shout out Stereophonic David Adjemi, who I really that is a masterpiece. It's please go. I'm sure everyone is going. I'm going to go back. Heidi Rodewald and I have a show about some punk rock singers, and we were just chatting about it, and just it's just a wonderful piece, and David has worked so hard all his life, and we see it in that play, and we see his heart, and it's really powerful.
Thank you for these. What a great list. What a great list.
Yeah. And now that you have plugged everyone, where can we find your work? What are things that we should be looking out by Crystal Skillman?
Yes. On June 25th, I hope you will join me at the Drama Bookshop. My play Open, which is about the love of 2 women told through a magic show without magic, will be celebrated. The publication came out in the pandemic, so Broadway Licensing and Drama Play Service are putting on this event. And Megan Hill, who originated in the cast, will be reading a section, as well as Lily Ali Oshatz, who went on tour for 4 cities in Italy, will also read a selection. And director Jesse D. Hill will be there. So it's part of Pride. Please come out. It's free. We're really excited about that. And then you could find out more about me at www.crystalskillman.com. I'm also my name everywhere. Crystal is like the rock, Crystal. I'm on Insta and all those good things. And my productions, as we kind of mentioned, start next year. So follow me now so you can keep track of all the announcements.
The final question of the whole show, the build up, why everybody listens, is the question of, where does theater begin for you?
I love this question because I've been noodling on it. One word after the other.
Ooh, one word after the other.
Yeah, because in live time, that's when an audience's experience, and it's not just sentence to sentence. I mean, it's word to word. And, I was in the room with a play that Sigourney Weaver was working on, and I am a big Sigourney fan, if anyone knows me. And also, Sigourney is like the nicest person. Like, I mean, just like a great, like, collaborator person in the room. And they were doing a piece with Liev Schreiber. I believe it was a Neil LaBute play at the time, back in the day. But it's a 2-person play, and everyone would ask Sigourney how they would do it because it's so hard. They're the only ones up there, And she said it's like a trapeze act. You just throw out your arms, and you have to trust that your partner is going to catch you. And that always, I thought, was so fantastic about what theater is for the performers. And I thought, as a playwright, when I'm writing, I'm throwing out one word and then the next word, so they're catching each other, kind of like a little circus act.
I love that.
What about you guys?
I was really thinking about, how you began, how theater doesn't always begin on a stage or in a theater class, or even with your eyes set on being a part of theater. I love hearing how you began as a visual art and photography major and sort of kind of stumbled into this through your own way of making theater. Yeah, so I think what I want to lift up is that sometimes theater begins in other art mediums and, I don't know, sneaks up on you.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, theater is sneaky.
It's very sneaky.
I think for me, I again was looking back at how you started, and I feel like people that trip into playwriting always have that discovery moment of, there's such thing as a living playwright. Like, you could just do that. And so for me, theater begins when you discover you can be a living playwright, and you have to fail out loud and succeed out loud. And that's just so important, that you do have to fail out loud, because it's a trial and error. Sometimes collaborations work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you write one idea down and then you get it on its feet and you realize that's not going to work, or what you put on paper isn't coming across. So what do you need to shift and change to do that? So the failing out loud part is important, because you also need to be brave enough to put it in front of people and choose yourself.
Which is so interesting, I think, too, like around theater, because you do have to have a bravery because other people are seeing it. In other art forms, you can keep it to yourself until it's ready. So, the whole part of this conversation, when you were talking about even kind of learning out loud, it is a really brave thing, as you say, Alayna.
Oh, thank you. And when I teach, I try as much to give, I teach different ways to workshop, hear your work, but I always give them a little test to get comfortable. How, you don't have to be the smoothest, so to speak, but like with rewriting in the room, with being able to have a conversation in real time, knowing that you're talking to a director in a hushed voice, but the team can probably hear you, to know just communication, because it can feel very awkward, because a playwright sometimes has created a whole universe inside themselves, and then they're meeting the world and they're coming out and unraveling. And so, you can always go back. You can always reinstate that page tomorrow. But always try. You don't know until you try. So look at these different roads, and then again, learn from the things that work or don't work. And another thing to remind everyone is sometimes and this happens quite often, you are being celebrated in a certain way and people love it. And you yourself feel like there's a better version of it. And so it really does come back to you and an honest conversation with your collaborators, but also an honest conversation of what you're looking for, what you want to try to hone as you age. And I think it happens naturally with age a bit, is to be critical of yourself consistently and to take the praise, but also not be swayed by praise, because it doesn't really get you what you want. So, and being critical doesn't mean you have to be sad, or it has to be lonely, or it has to be, it doesn't feel great all the time, but all it means is that you're in conversation and in check with yourself.
Really good distinction. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was a lovely conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was awesome. I've been, I love the podcast. I love all the things you've been doing, and I'm just really honored to be here. And I hope this helps other writers.
No doubt it will. Join us for our next episode on July 31st. Let us know on Spotify where theater begins for you. Feel free to send your questions for future episodes to the link in the bio.
Thanks for listening to Playwright Center's Theater Begins Here.